Fog pressed low over London, smothering the chimneys and swallowing the cries of street vendors until the city seemed to whisper rather than breathe. Inside a narrow room above a milliner's shop, a young seamstress bent over a half-finished gown, her fingers red and raw from the needle. The fabric, silk the color of moonlight, shimmered against her patched apron, a cruel reminder that beauty often belonged to others. Evelyn Hartwell worked in silence, her shoulders curved with the kind of weariness that does not come from labor alone but from being unseen. Around her, girls chattered over ribbons and lace, each trying to outpace the other for their mistress's praise. Evelyn did not join them. Her eyes, pale and thoughtful as morning rain, fixed on the gown before her as if she were sewing not cloth but hope itself. From the street below rose the clatter of carriage wheels and the sharp laughter of ladies who would soon wear her handiwork to glittering assemblies where chandeliers burned like captive stars. She imagined briefly what it might feel like to walk beneath such light, and then, ashamed of her fancy, pricked her thumb and watched a bead of blood bloom across the fabric like a rose too red to belong. "Mind yourself, Hartwell," the head seamstress barked. "Ruined silk costs more than your year's wages." The older woman's words sliced the air, the other girls smirked. Evelyn murmured an apology, folded the spoiled edge and kept sewing. But her hands trembled. She had eaten nothing since dawn, and the candle wax had nearly reached its end. When at last the bell above the shop door chimed, announcing a visitor, the mistress's voice brightened with the false warmth reserved for patrons. Through the open curtain Evelyn glimpsed a woman in a faded cloak, her mother. Mrs. Hartwell's once refined face had thinned with worry. Her gloved hands clutched a small reticule so tightly the seams strained. Evelyn rose, startled. They had agreed her mother would not come here. It was unseemly for family to appear during work hours and worse, for someone to see how poor they truly were. But the look in her mother's eyes made protest impossible. They stepped into the stairwell, the candlelight trembling between them. "Evelyn," her mother whispered, her breath quick and uneven, "it is done. I have found you a match." Evelyn's heart stumbled. A match. A gentleman from Yorkshire. A widower of sound reputation. He has offered marriage without dowry. He seeks companionship more than alliance. Her mother tried to smile, but her voice broke. "We have no choice, my love. The landlord has threatened eviction. Your brothers are too young to earn and your father's debts." She stopped, pressing a hand to her chest. "This will save us all." The candle guttered. Evelyn could only hear the hum of her own blood. She had dreamed, quietly, foolishly, of marrying for affection, of being chosen for the warmth of her spirit rather than the desperation of her circumstances. "And this man," she said at last, "does he know what I am?" "He knows enough. He wishes for a wife of modest temper, not ambition. He has a small estate, peaceful and private. You would be safe." Safe. The word sounded like a cage with silk ribbons. Yet she saw the fear in her mother's eyes, the same fear that had driven every woman of their class to compromise. Evelyn nodded once, though her throat burned as if she had swallowed fire. That evening, when the shop had emptied and the lamps along the street flickered to life, Evelyn remained by the window, watching the fog curl around the gaslight. She imagined her future dissolving within it, her needle, her independence, her London. Below, two boys tossed snow at one another, laughing without care. She envied their freedom to choose even their games. A knock startled her. The mistress entered, smoothing her gown. "Your mother has left word," she said curtly. "The gentleman calls tomorrow. You are dismissed from service after tonight." Dismissed? A married woman cannot work here. Be grateful. Few men would take a seamstress, let alone one with your looks. The woman's gaze softened for a fleeting instant. "Do not look so frightened, child. Many wives begin without love and learn it by degrees." That night, Evelyn packed her belongings, a worn Bible, a spool of thread, a ribbon from her father's coat, into a small wooden chest. She slept little. Each hour brought another doubt, another whisper of dread. But when dawn spread thin gold across the rooftops, she rose, washed her face and dressed in her plainest gown. Her reflection in the cracked mirror startled her. She looked not like a bride, but like a girl attending her own farewell. The carriage awaited outside the modest lodging they called home. A tall man stood beside it, his posture correct but not proud. His hair, touched by silver at the temples, caught the early light. He bowed as she approached. "Miss Hartwell." His voice was low, steady. "I am Nathaniel Ashbury, sir." She curtsied, eyes lowered. She had expected someone coarser, older perhaps. Yet there was a refinement in his bearing that unsettled her, as though he belonged to a world she had only glimpsed through embroidery frames. They spoke little during the ceremony, held that same afternoon in a quiet chapel smelling of damp stone and lilies. Nathaniel's vows were precise, almost clinical, but his hand, when it touched hers, was warm. She answered with composure she did not feel. When the minister declared them man and wife, she wondered how one could become both more and less of oneself in a single moment. Afterward, in the grey courtyard, her mother embraced her fiercely and whispered, "You have saved us, my darling girl." Then the older woman turned away before Evelyn could reply. Nathaniel offered his arm, guiding her to the waiting carriage. Inside, velvet cushions pressed against her trembling fingers. As the city receded, Evelyn watched London blur into mist, chimneys dissolving, river gleaming like molten pewter. The rhythm of hooves on cobblestone marked the measure of her new life. Nathaniel sat opposite her, gloved hands resting on his cane, gaze fixed beyond the window. Silence grew between them, deep and courteous. At last he spoke. "You need not fear me, Mrs. Ashbury. I ask little of you beyond peace and discretion. Haramir is a quiet place. It will suit you." "Haramir?" she repeated. He inclined his head. "Haramir Hall. My home." The name stirred something faintly familiar, a rumor once overheard in the shop, of an estate belonging to a noble family whose heir had vanished after tragedy. But before she could question him, the carriage turned sharply, and his expression shuddered into unreadable calm. Outside, snow began to fall, whitening the road ahead. Evelyn pressed her hand to the fogged glass, watching the flakes blur the world into silence. She thought of her mother's relief, of the vows just spoken, of the stranger who now called her wife. Then she heard Nathaniel murmur to the coachman, almost too softly to catch, "To Haramir Hall." The words lingered in the air like a secret promise or a warning yet to unfold. The carriage crested the last rise before dusk, revealing Haramir Hall like a relic unearthed from the bones of the earth, its grey stone facade half swallowed by ivy, its windows lit with the pale, patient glow of candles. Evelyn had imagined something smaller, a gentleman's estate perhaps, but this was grandeur subdued by silence. The hills rolled away into fog. No other house or human figure disturbed the horizon. When the coach halted, a thin wind lifted her veil as though curious about the bride within. Nathaniel stepped out first. The crunch of gravel under his boots echoed faintly before he turned, offering his gloved hand with impeccable courtesy. His face, seen clearly now, bore no cruelty, only an impenetrable calm like a man long acquainted with solitude. Evelyn hesitated before placing her hand in his. The warmth of his palm startled her. It did not match his eyes, which seemed fixed somewhere behind her, as if haunted by something the living could not see. They entered the great hall, where the air smelled faintly of pine and smoke. A butler bowed so deeply it might have been worship. "Welcome home, your Gier." The man caught himself, clearing his throat. "My lord." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, a warning disguised as civility. Evelyn noticed, and though she did not yet understand the weight of the interruption, something in her chest tightened. She looked around. Portraits hung in gilt frames, faces of noble ancestors staring down as though uncertain how to greet her. None bore the look of country modesty she had been promised. A housekeeper named Mrs. Lang met her with a curtsy. "My lady, your rooms are prepared." "My lady." Evelyn almost laughed, softly, painfully. The words felt borrowed, like silk draped over a wound. In her chambers, she stood before a mirror and removed her veil. The reflection startled her. A girl not yet 20, surrounded by velvet curtains and marble hearth, her plain muslin gown an act of defiance against the luxury pressing close around her. She traced a hand along the edge of the dressing table, noticing the delicate inlay of mother of pearl, the faint scent of lavender powder lingering from another woman's touch. Somewhere in this house, she thought, a ghost had not yet left. Dinner was served in a long, candlelit hall that seemed too vast for two souls. The table stretched like a corridor of polished oak, yet Nathaniel had placed her directly opposite, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his right brow. He ate little, speaking only to ask whether she found the journey fatiguing. She answered politely, though her appetite had fled. A clock chimed, the sound trembling through the room. Nathaniel set down his fork. "You will find Haramir quiet," he said. "It has been so for many years. The servants are few but loyal. They value discretion above all." Evelyn nodded. "I value it as well." He inclined his head, approving. Yet she could not miss the faintest curve of something, melancholy perhaps, at the corner of his mouth. When at last he rose, she followed him to the corridor. "If you have need of anything," he said, pausing near the stair, "send word through Mrs. Lang. I retire early." His tone held no unkindness, yet it left her oddly cold. "Good night, my lord." He hesitated, then looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that day. "Evelyn," he said quietly, testing her name. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark of the upper hall. That night, sleep refused her. She wandered the corridor in her nightdress, guided only by moonlight. The portraits glimmered faintly, each pair of painted eyes following her progress. She paused before one, an elegant woman in a sapphire gown holding a white rose. The plaque beneath read Lady Catherine Ashbury, Duchess of Haramir. Evelyn's heart stumbled. The features were delicate, serene, unmistakably noble, and faintly sorrowful. She whispered to the empty hall, "His first wife." The silence that answered felt alive. In the following days she tried to settle into the rhythm of country life. The servants watched her with wary kindness, as if protecting a secret they were forbidden to reveal. Nathaniel disappeared each morning to his study, where he wrote letters in a precise, slanted hand. Once, when she entered to leave tea, she noticed parchment sealed with a red crest, a coronet above the letter A. He covered it swiftly. "Private correspondence," he said almost too evenly. "Of course," she murmured, retreating. Later, she asked Mrs. Lang about the crest, affecting idle curiosity. The housekeeper paled. "Some matters, my lady, are best left untouched." The air of Haramir grew thick with unsaid things. Even the landscape seemed to mirror it, bare trees bowing beneath mist, the lake reflecting only gray. One afternoon a carriage arrived unannounced. A neighbor, Mr. Haversham, rotund and flushed from brandy. Nathaniel received him in the parlor, while Evelyn lingered at the doorway half-hidden. "So the rumors were true," Haversham drawled, his gaze flicking to her. "A new mistress at Haramir. You've done well to return at last, Ashbury." The name struck her like a bell. Ashbury. She turned sharply toward her husband, but he ignored her, merely replying, "You are mistaken. I never left." Haversham chuckled. "The countryside remembers differently. They say the Duke of Ashbury buried his heart with his Duchess and vanished from England itself. But perhaps grief is curable, given youth and company." His eyes lingered on Evelyn too long. Nathaniel's voice cooled to steel. "You will leave now." When the guest had gone, Evelyn found him in his study, staring into the fire. "He called you the Duke of Ashbury," she said softly. "Why would he?" "It was a jest," he interrupted. "A cruel one. I bear no such title." His denial was calm, too calm. She wanted to believe him. Yet when he left the room she glanced again at the desk, and there, half-hidden beneath a sheet of parchment, gleamed a ring of gold engraved with a coronet identical to the one on the sealed letters. That night, she sat by the window of her chamber, the locket he had given her resting in her palm. He had presented it after dinner, almost as apology for his silence. "A small token," he'd said. "You should have something of beauty here." When she'd opened it, she found not his portrait, but that of the woman in blue, the late Duchess, serene as ever. Now moonlight touched the locket, and Evelyn felt an ache she could not name. Who was she to him? A replacement, a disguise, or both? The wind outside lifted the curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of roses, though no garden bloomed this late in the season. She rose, driven by a pulse of restless certainty, and descended the stairs barefoot. The study door stood ajar. Inside, the fire had died to embers. Upon the desk lay a drawer slightly open, a glint of gilt visible within. Her fingers trembled as she drew it out. A miniature portrait, Nathaniel himself, younger, proud, cloaked in ducal regalia, the coronet gleaming above his brow. A breath caught in her throat. The truth was no longer speculation. It stared back at her from the painted eyes of the man she had married. Behind her, the floor creaked. She turned sharply. But the doorway was empty. Only the whisper of the dying fire answered, as if the house itself had seen this discovery many times before. Dawn broke gray and quiet over Haramir Hall, its light creeping through the tall windows like a secret too shy to be confessed. Evelyn sat beside the fire, the miniature portrait resting in her palm. The painted eyes of Nathaniel, her husband, her stranger, gleamed with noble confidence, so unlike the man she had come to know. She turned it over. On the back, an inscription faintly engraved read Nathaniel, Duke of Ashbury. The truth felt cold against her skin. When Nathaniel entered, he paused at the threshold as though sensing the tremor in the air. He was without his coat, sleeves rolled, the first time she had seen him so human. "You've not slept," he observed. "I could say the same," she answered, voice steadier than her pulse. She held out the portrait. You might tell me why my husband hides behind another name." He stood motionless, the silence stretching between them until the clock's ticking became a living thing. Then, with a slow breath, he shut the door and came nearer. "You were not meant to find that," he said quietly. "You deceived me," she whispered. "You let me believe I'd married a simple gentleman. Instead I find myself, what? A duchess in secret? Or a pawn in your exile?" Nathaniel leaned his arm against the mantel, eyes shadowed by the firelight. "Both, perhaps." She stared at him, searching for cruelty, finding only sorrow. "Why?" His voice was low, brittle at the edges. "Because I have seen what that title does. My first wife was hunted by it, her smile dissected at every dinner table, her grace paraded, her pain dismissed. She sought peace where none existed, and I could not save her." He turned away, shoulders drawn tight. "When she died, I buried not only her, but the Duke of Ashbury himself. The world may keep its gossip. I wished only for silence." Evelyn's anger softened, though the wound of deceit still throbbed. "And yet you brought me here," she said, her voice trembling. "To this hall filled with her face, her perfume, her ghost. What part am I meant to play in your silence?" He met her gaze at last. "You were meant to remind me that life still breathes beyond the grave. I did not expect you to uncover the ashes I buried." Something within her faltered. For the first time she saw not a cold recluse but a man stripped of armor. Still, his confession left her untethered, half wife, half stranger to her own life. The firelight wavered. Nathaniel moved to the piano in the corner, running his fingers over its dusted keys. "She played," he said softly. "Every night until her hands trembled. I have not heard music since." Evelyn approached, drawn by a pull she did not understand. Her hand brushed the keys. "You should hear it again." He shook his head. "It belongs to another time." "Then let me reclaim it." Her tone surprised even her, a flicker of defiance, of womanhood not entirely subdued. She sat and pressed one key then another. The notes rose fragile and uncertain, like a bird testing its wings. Nathaniel's breath caught. The melody faltered under her inexperience, but the sound was enough to fill the hollow space between them. When she stopped, the silence returned softer, less cruel. Nathaniel stood beside her, the faintest trace of warmth breaking through his reserve. "You have courage," he murmured. "More than I. I only played a few notes. You entered a room filled with ghosts and dared to make it living again." His words lingered like a hand upon her cheek. She lowered her gaze, unsure how to hold such tenderness. Days followed with a fragile truce. Nathaniel kept to his study, yet his glances grew less guarded, his speech more deliberate, as though relearning human company. Evelyn, in turn, explored the estate, the rose garden gone wild, the lake rimmed in frost. She began to sense Haramir not as a prison but as a place waiting to breathe again. One afternoon, as she mended his riding coat by the fire, a servant entered with a sealed letter bearing a crimson wax crest. Nathaniel's expression shifted the moment he saw it. He took the letter, dismissed the servant, and broke the seal. His eyes darkened as he read. "From London?" she asked. He hesitated, then folded the paper with precision. "An invitation," he said. "A command, rather. The Prince Regent insists upon my presence at the upcoming ball." "The Duke of Ashbury cannot stay dead forever," she murmured. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I have refused before." "And will you again?" He looked to the fire. "Refusal would bring attention. They already whisper of my reclusion. If I do not appear, they will come seeking answers." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. "Then we must go." "We? You cannot face them alone." "And I," she paused, uncertain how boldness would sound in her own mouth, "I must learn to stand where your name already places me." He regarded her with something like astonishment. "You would walk into that viper's nest, knowing what they will say of you?" "They already say it," she replied, folding the mended sleeve. "At least there they will see whom they mock." A faint smile ghosted his lips, the first she had seen. "You are remarkable, Mrs. Ashbury." "Evelyn," she corrected softly. "If I am to be seen, let it be by my name." That night he found her in the library, poring over a book of court etiquette. "Do you seek instruction or armor?" he asked. "Both," she said, not looking up. "A seamstress knows the power of presentation. A stitch may hold or ruin a gown." Nathaniel stepped closer, the scent of cedar and smoke enveloping her. "And what if you unravel instead?" She lifted her eyes to his. "Then let them see the thread that holds me." For a long moment neither moved. The air seemed to hum with words unsaid. Then he reached into his pocket and drew out a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a brooch, a delicate silver rose with a single pearl at its heart. "If you must enter that world, wear this. It will remind them who you are." She took it carefully, the weight both light and immense. "And who am I, my lord?" "The woman I never expected," he said simply. The fire crackled, throwing gold across their faces. For a heartbeat, the distance between them vanished. Then Nathaniel stepped back as if fearing the warmth he had allowed. "It grows late," he murmured. After he left, Evelyn pinned the brooch to her gown and stood before the mirror. In her reflection she saw not the frightened girl from London, but a figure shaped by endurance, ready to walk among those who would scorn her. The hall clock chimed midnight, its sound echoing through corridors that no longer felt entirely cold. From the window she saw the messenger riding into the distance, carrying their acceptance to London. A gust of wind swept through the room, fluttering the curtains like the beginning of applause, or warning. Evelyn pressed her hand to the brooch and whispered to the night, "Let them see the seamstress and may they tremble." Behind her, down the corridor, Nathaniel's study door creaked open, light spilling briefly into the dark. He watched her silhouette framed in moonlight, and in his eyes flickered something fierce and unfamiliar, hope fragile as music. London shimmered like a diamond in winter's grasp, streets slick with frost, carriages grinding through fog, lamplight trembling against polished stone. For Evelyn, it was a city she knew by hunger and labor, yet now she returned draped in velvet and silence, a duchess hidden beneath borrowed splendor. The horses slowed before Ashbury House, its marble steps lined with bowing footmen. When Nathaniel offered his hand to help her descend, she noticed the faint tremor there. The Duke had not vanished after all, he had merely been waiting for this reckoning. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and intrigue. Courtiers and noblewomen filled the drawing room, their laughter bright and cruel. Evelyn felt their eyes prick her skin like needles. They saw the gown she had sewn herself, ivory silk with pearl embroidery, and recognized it not as elegance but audacity. Whispers bloomed like ivy. The seamstress bride. The country widow. The Duke's folly. Nathaniel's presence beside her steadied her pulse. He moved through the crowd with quiet authority, acknowledging bows and murmurs, his hand occasionally brushing hers in reassurance. When he introduced her, his voice held no hesitation. "My wife, the Duchess of Ashbury." The words rippled through the gathering. Some curtsied too low, others too little. Evelyn curtsied back, her spine straight, her smile faint but unwavering. She met their stares as if they were needles she could thread into lace. Lady Pembroke, resplendent in crimson, glided forward. "So delightful," she said sweetly. "We were beginning to wonder whether the Duke still lived, or merely became legend. And now to learn he returns with how charming, a self-made duchess." Evelyn inclined her head. "Indeed, my lady. A legend cannot live forever, but a man may try." A few gasps stirred. Nathaniel's mouth twitched, the ghost of pride passing through his restraint. He offered Evelyn his arm and steered her away, his tone low enough for her alone. "You have a talent for disarming vipers." "I've stitched finer monsters in silk," she murmured. Later, as musicians struck their bows and the ballroom opened in a blaze of light, Evelyn stood near the edge of the floor, watching gold and ivory gowns whirl in perfect rhythm. Her hands itched, not with envy but memory. She had hemmed such gowns once, pressing her face to cool glass to glimpse the very life she now lived. Yet inside her chest, humility and defiance warred for breath. Nathaniel approached, bowing formally. "Duchess." "Your Grace," she answered with equal poise. "Will you dance?" Her eyes lifted to his. "Would that not scandalize the ton beyond recovery? Then let us scandalize them." He led her onto the floor. The violins rose, slow and mournful, and together they moved through the waltz. His steps steady, hers tentative until the rhythm caught them both. The chandeliers cast rivers of gold through her hair. Her gown swept in time with his breath. Around them, the room seemed to fade until only two figures remained, a man relearning grace, a woman realizing her own. When the final note died, a hush followed. Then came the applause, hesitant but sincere. Nathaniel inclined his head to her, the faintest smile daring to surface. "You've won them," he said softly. "No," she whispered, breath trembling. "I've merely reminded them I was never theirs to lose." The evening blurred into soft candlelight and murmured politics. Men approached Nathaniel with cautious flattery. Women with concealed envy approached Evelyn. Some asked after her gown, astonished when she admitted she had sewn it. Others, emboldened by curiosity, inquired how a seamstress captured a duke's heart. She deflected with gentility, though her pulse thundered in her ears. As the hour waned, she sought air. Outside, the garden shimmered with frost, moonlight pooling across marble statues. She wrapped her shawl tight and stepped into the quiet. For the first time all evening she could breathe. But she was not alone. A man emerged from the shadows near the fountain. Lord Pembroke, his expression half sneer, half smirk. "Your Grace," he drawled, "what a marvel you are. The talk of London. A seamstress turned Duchess. England loves a fable, though it seldom ends well." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Then let them end it as they please. My life is not their entertainment." He circled closer, voice dropping. "You think title protects you?" asked the last Duchess. Poor thing couldn't bear the eyes upon her. The words struck deep. Before she could reply, a shadow moved behind her. Nathaniel's voice sliced through the cold. "That is enough, Pembroke." The lord froze, color draining. Nathaniel stepped forward, his authority unmistakable. "You will leave my wife untroubled, or you will leave London entirely. Choose wisely." Pembroke bowed stiffly, retreating into the night. Silence returned, brittle as glass. Evelyn turned to Nathaniel, anger and confusion warring within her. "Why did you not tell me how she died? Why hide her pain?" He exhaled, the sound almost a confession. "Because it was my shame. I let the world consume her while I guarded only the title. When she was gone, I vowed to let both die." His voice faltered. "Until you." Her breath hitched. "Then why bring me into it?" "Because you were unafraid of silence," he said. "Because when I met you, you looked at me and saw not the Duke, but the man who wished to disappear." Emotion welled in her throat. "And now, what do you see?" He stepped closer, the frost glinting in his hair. "A woman who made me wish to live again." The space between them seemed to dissolve. He reached for her hand, roughened by years of work, and raised it to his lips. "You are not what they think you are, Evelyn. You are the truth they pretend not to see." Her heart stuttered at the quiet reverence in his voice. "And you," she whispered, "are the lie I no longer fear." He smiled faintly, but the expression trembled with something deeper. "Then we are equal." Inside, the orchestra struck a triumphant chord. The world they had fled was waiting to reclaim them. Nathaniel looked toward the glow of chandeliers spilling through the windows. "They will talk of this night for years," he said. "Let them." Evelyn followed his gaze. "So long as they speak of what matters." He turned back to her. "And what matters?" "That you did not hide." Nathaniel's hand tightened around hers. "Not from you. Never again." The words felt like a vow born from ruin. They walked back toward the ballroom together, the frost crunching beneath their steps. As they entered, conversations faltered. The Duke of Ashbury had returned, not as myth but as man, and the seamstress beside him carried herself like destiny. When the crowd parted, Nathaniel's voice carried clearly across the hall. "This," he said, resting his hand over hers, "is my wife, and the life I choose." For a moment time held its breath. Then applause erupted, startled, scattered, uncertain whether it honored rebellion or romance. Evelyn curtsied once, her gaze steady upon her husband. Across the mirrored ballroom, Lady Pembroke's painted smile faded. She leaned to a companion and whispered, "If scandal could wear grace, it would wear her face." Evelyn heard it and almost smiled. The words no longer wounded, they simply marked her arrival. As the orchestra began anew, Nathaniel leaned close, voice just above a whisper. "When they bow to you tomorrow, remember tonight was the first time I truly saw you." Evelyn's lips parted, but before she could answer, a servant approached, pale and breathless. "Your Graces," he stammered, "a letter from Haramir, urgent." Nathaniel broke the seal, eyes flicking across the page. The color drained from his face. Evelyn's hand found his arm. "What is it?" He looked at her, the weight of old ghosts returning. "Haramir is burning." The journey north was a blur of wind and firelight. The night air cut like glass, and the wheels of the carriage thundered through sleet and shadow. Evelyn clutched the seat as Nathaniel sat opposite her, his face carved in grim resolve. The letter still lay open between them, its words stark and final, Haramir Hall ablaze. 'Cause unknown. The estate that had sheltered their silences and secrets was dying, and with it, perhaps, the last remnant of his past. They arrived near dawn. The horizon glowed red against the storm, a wound splitting the earth. Flames clawed at the night sky, licking through the windows of Haramir's upper floors, devouring the very heart of the house. Servants swarmed like shadows, their voices lost in the roar. Evelyn stepped out before Nathaniel could stop her, skirts soaking instantly in the frozen mud. The air burned her lungs, thick with ash and memory. "Evelyn, stay back," Nathaniel shouted, striding toward the entrance. But she followed. "You'll be killed if you go inside alone." He turned to her, eyes bright with a feverish clarity. "I have already lived like a ghost. Let me die where I was once alive." Her hand caught his sleeve before he could move. "Then let me haunt you," she said. For a heartbeat he froze, then nodded once and they entered together. Inside, the grand hall was unrecognizable. Smoke coiled along the ceiling and embers rained like dying stars. The portraits of Ashbury ancestors, their watchful eyes, their polished frames, crumbled one by one, falling into the inferno. Evelyn's throat ached from the heat. Somewhere above, timber cracked and a section of the balcony crashed down in a burst of sparks. They pressed forward. Nathaniel tore his coat to shield her from the falling debris. "The study," he rasped. "Letters, papers, everything that proves who I am, it's there." But when they reached the door, the flames had already claimed it. The mahogany panels glowed like molten amber. Evelyn grasped his arm. "Let it go." "I can't," he said, voice breaking. "It's the last of her, of Catherine. Her letters, her portrait." "Then it will burn as she did," Evelyn said sharply. "And you will stay to remember it." For a moment, his anguish turned toward her, raw and human. Then the balcony above gave a final groan and split. Evelyn shoved him aside as a beam crashed where he'd stood. Smoke engulfed them both, blinding, choking. Nathaniel found her hand through the darkness and pulled her toward the entrance, stumbling over shattered glass. The world narrowed to heat and heartbeat. When at last they burst into the open air, both collapsed onto the frozen ground, gasping as the hall behind them roared like a dying beast. The dawn was pale and cruel. Ash fell like snow upon the ruined estate. Nathaniel knelt, staring at the skeletal remains of his home, the place that had held his grief captive for years. "It's over," he whispered. "Everything, gone." Evelyn, still coughing, turned to him. "Not everything." He looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing her not as the woman fate had delivered to his doorstep, but as the anchor he had refused to name. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," she said softly. "When you gave me this name, you thought you were rescuing me from poverty. But you gave me something greater, the right to stand beside you now." The wind shifted, scattering embers like fireflies. Nathaniel reached for her hand, pressing it to his chest. "You were never meant to be caught in my ruin." "I was meant to rebuild it," she said simply. For a while neither spoke. The servants gathered in small, trembling groups, whispering prayers, mourning the loss of their home. Mrs. Lang approached, face streaked with soot. "My lord, the fire started in the west wing. We found lantern glass shattered, no sign of accident." Nathaniel's expression hardened. "You mean it was set?" "Aye, your grace. Someone meant for Haramir to burn." Evelyn's thoughts flashed to Lord Pembroke's sneer in the garden, his threat cloaked in insinuation. "There are those who wished your silence permanent," she said. Nathaniel rose, firelight still flickering in his eyes. "Then they shall have to face the man they failed to destroy." Over the next days, they took refuge in the small stone lodge on the edge of the estate. The hall still smoldered in the distance, its ruins veiled in mist. London papers spun their stories, rumors of scandal, revenge, and ghosts, but within the quiet lodge the world felt far away. Evelyn spent her mornings sewing garments for the displaced servants, her needle moving with purpose rather than survival. Nathaniel joined her often, sleeves rolled, repairing what he could, furniture, fences, faith. They worked in companionable silence, their grief reshaped into motion. One afternoon she found him by the window, holding a half-burned letter recovered from the wreckage. "It's from Catherine," he said. Her handwriting, barely legible. But one line survived. He handed it to her. Evelyn read it aloud, her voice steady. "If ever the world forgets your kindness, let it live again in someone who sees you without your crown." Nathaniel closed his eyes. "She foresaw you." "No," Evelyn said gently. "She foresaw your chance to love again." He looked at her, something luminous breaking through years of restraint. "And if I've already fallen? Then you will not fall alone." He crossed to her, the distance closing like a page turning to its last line. His hand rose, tentative, to her face, thumb tracing the soot still smudged on her cheek. "Evelyn Hartwell Ashbury," he murmured as if testing the full shape of her name for the first time, "you have turned every ruin into grace. Tears welled in her eyes, though she smiled through them. "And you, my lord, have turned every silence into confession." He kissed her then, slow, reverent, the kind of kiss that spoke of recognition rather than conquest. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. The wind moved through the open window, carrying the faint scent of charred roses from the garden that once bloomed below. When they drew apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "We'll rebuild Haramir," he said. "Not as a monument, but as a home." She nodded. "And fill it with music again." A faint smile curved his lips. "Will you play for me?" "Only if you promise to listen." That night, the first since the fire, Evelyn sat at the small piano salvaged from the ruins. Her fingers trembled as she began, a melody unfinished from days before. Nathaniel stood behind her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, eyes closed as if to capture every note. The music rose fragile and pure, carrying the weight of everything they had lost and everything they had found. When the final chord faded, the silence that followed was no longer empty. Weeks later, when spring touched the hills, they walked through the remains of Haramir together. Builders had begun to clear the wreckage, their hammers echoing like distant drums of rebirth. In the courtyard, new shoots pushed through the ash, green and stubborn. Evelyn knelt to touch them. "Even fire can sow something living," she murmured. Nathaniel looked down at her, the early sun softening his features. "Perhaps that is what love truly is, not the spark that begins but the life that grows after ruin." She rose, taking his hand. "Then let us tend it carefully." As they turned toward the lodge, the wind carried with it the faint tolling of the village church bells. Word had spread of their survival, and the tale of the seamstress who became a duchess had already taken root beyond their knowing. Evelyn smiled faintly. "They'll make a story of us." "Let them," he said. "But this," he lifted her hand, threading his fingers through hers, "this will never belong to them." The camera of dawn widened over the landscape, the scorched hall, the new blossoms, the couple walking toward the light. Nathaniel glanced back once at the ruins, then forward again, to the future she had sown, thread by trembling thread. And as they disappeared into the gold of morning, his voice, quiet as prayer, lingered in the air. "You were never my escape, Evelyn. You were my return."